location, back in the corner. Center Point Energy Services, ICG Interior Construction Group, Kahan International, Right Size Facility Performance, Front Furniture, Flooring Management Group, and Food for Thought, all behind the screen. Food for Thought is also our featured sponsor of the month. So if you go to the website, you find out more about Food for Thought and what they have to offer our members. A little bit of a history about the people who work there and some of the people who are part of our group as well. This is a new benefit that we're providing to all of our sponsors. So each month, a different sponsor will be featured on our website with some additional information about what service they have to offer our members. We'd like to thank our program host, Nakamura, specific, Enza, Sienna, for arranging everything with us. Our lunch sponsor also is our Christian Tagashi Yada. He will be speaking in just a couple minutes about the programs. One other thing before we get started, one thing we want to introduce to you, you should have received by this time some information about the bundling program for the chapter. So currently, when you pay for your Chicago and your national membership, there's two different fees. There's a $92 fee for Chicago membership, and there's another fee for national. Well, and then you pay for your individual programs that you attend. Beginning July 1st of this year, we're going to be bundling the Chicago chapter membership with our fees for programs. So this way, it will be $212 for Chicago membership, but you don't have to pay for any programs throughout the rest of the year. So if you attend all the programs, it would be about $320. But so essentially, you're going to buy 3 and get 5 free. So we heard this is a benefit because there's a lot of people whose companies will pay for their membership, but not for the programs. So we're hoping that this will continue to encourage more and more people to attend the programs, which is ultimately our goal. Okay. If you have any questions about how it'll work, it's on the website. Come talk to me. Come talk to any members of the executive board. And we're going to continue to talk about this until July. You get tired of it. Okay. I'd like to introduce Pam Hill, who is our speaker for today. Many people in the legal industry have been working with Pam for a number of years. I've known Pam for a couple years. I would let her take over and talk a little
Oh, Sonia.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. My mistake. My mistake.
Okay, how are you? Thank you. So we appreciate the opportunity to support such kind of a great event here. So we have some more extra lunch that could you enjoy, and of course after the program could you enjoy our products. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so logistically, where is this being recorded?
Yes.
I take it. So where should I stay? Like just right behind the podium?
You're saying
I just got a new outfit for this show.
I did too.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really excited. I'm a business continuity disaster recovery planner by trade. I've been doing this for about 30 years. I've done hundreds of plans, although I have to say that never taught me nearly as much as actually being on the ground during disasters with clients. I spent 30 days on the ground in the New Orleans area after Katrina, basically rebuilding a firm from scratch down there. So that's really the most interesting stuff that I've ever done, I have to say. Obviously, a long time ago, I'm actually an Illinois State certified firefighter and a medic. It's been a while since I've done emergency stuff because I got old and fat, but hey, I definitely remember some of it. And the reason I want to say that is because all the stuff we're going to talk about today, nobody ever told me. I learned this from yoga. Half of the stuff I'm actually going to talk about. What I really hope is that you guys will throw something at me, stop me when you have questions, because I have to say one of the things that I'm struggling with is taking this training and putting it to emergency teams. And so I need your help. I've got the perfect audience. I'm really excited to talk with you guys about how you can really take this, because I think this is the missing link. talking about the physiology and the psychology of disaster. You guys may not be aware of this, but it actually took 6 minutes after the plane hit the second tower after 9/11, 6 minutes for people to start evacuating. And they assumed, they built the structure assuming it would take 30 seconds to floor, actually took a minute of floor because people didn't respond the way that they were supposed to. So I'm going to talk through how that breaks down, where does this really fall apart, and then talk about some of the coping methods that I think are absolutely essential for you to teach people. The military gets this training and a lot of law enforcement get this training, but the fact is that the rest of us, average Joes, don't ever get this kind of training, and nobody ever told me any of this when I was going through it. And what that really leads to is what's in the military they refer to as stress inoculation training, and that is really the core difference of what I'm talking about. And then I'm going to give you some coping strategies as well. So the main thing that you need to know, it used to be kind of the fight or flight, right? You've all heard of that. It's actually a lot more complex than that when you are actually going through a situation. What people tend to do is they actually freeze first. And this is a biological imperative, okay? We want to stop, we want to look at the threat, because we're very visual, binocular creatures. We look at the threat, and that's the first step to actually assessing it, coming up with a plan, and then running, freezing, whatever it is we end up doing after that. So we turn into the threat. I had a client not too long ago say there was an explosion downtown Chicago. Some windows got blown out of the building. She said the first thing, she was at a street fair, the first thing everybody did was turn and look at it. And she said, why did I do that? Well, then I told her because she was crazy. Come to find out, what was happening is that she was actually turning into the threat, doing exactly what biologically we are intended to do. Flight mode is that we want to separate ourselves from the threat. This doesn't happen nearly as often as you might think. That is not the initial thing, because it used to be back in the day that you saw a saber-toothed tiger, you didn't have to stop and think about what the threat was, right? You knew what it was and you were going to run away from the saber-toothed tiger, right? But the kinds of threats that we have now facing us are so much more complex. So that pause of evaluating the threat, turning into it, trying to figure out the level of threat that it actually is what's really creating this delay in response. And the main thing that I think is important about active shooter scenario or workplace violence is the majority of the time you're not walking down the hall and somebody comes off the elevator with a gun. Right? What you're usually doing is sitting in a meeting like this, and all of a sudden you hear pop, 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 and you go, what's that? Or, and don't tell me you haven't all done this, the tornado sirens go off, and the first thing you do is walk over to the window, right? Admit it, you all do that. So anyway, flight isn't really all that common. Women are much more likely to go here than the next one, which is fight mode, which is kind of the new kind of training that they're doing for workplace violence now. The Department of Homeland Security says fight only as a last resort, and if your life is threatened, but by golly, you need to be ready to really fight. And this is something people need to have approval for, right? We're so overly politically correct nowadays that nobody will actually stand up for themselves anymore. And so it's really important that you're actually training through that, and we're going to talk about how to do scenarios, and that needs to be one of the things you're actually practicing, because it's not kind of the natural thing, right? We've gotten that beat out of us over the years. And then there's fright mode. Fright is actually a hyper-vigilant state. That's deer in the headlights. That's standing there going, oh my God, what do I do now? And so that is where you do not want to be, because that's when you're just literally standing there, and that's how you end up getting shot. And what they found about a lot of the things that have been going on recently is that, like in Colorado, I think it was in Aurora, Colorado, where the movie theater, is that a lot of those people actually just stood there. Just stood there. Somebody standing in front of them with a gun, shooting other people, and they just stood there. So we're going to talk about how to get yourself out of that, because you do not want to be there. So here's what really happens during the initial phases of an emergency. Within 1/20th of a second, not even a full second, 1/20th of a second, this is how good your reptilian brain is. It starts pumping those hormones into your body. It literally bypasses the part of your brain that is responsible for thought. It literally bypasses it, and it pumps those hormones in. I'm going to give a breakdown on the next slide of that. But it happens so fast, your mind leaves your body, and it takes a while for it to actually catch up. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How do you get caught up with that? It occurs during actual events or even when someone simply perceives a threat. So that's really important to know, because you may be still in investigative mood, or there's smoke in the building, you're trying to figure out what's going on, and somebody is actually freaking out about it already, right? Because that perception still triggers the hormones. One interesting thing, I can always tell somebody that was in New York during 9/11, because they will jump to evacuation so fast it will make your head spin. Even if it is not a real threat, it's because they've got that trained into their brain now, that run. I didn't run that one time, and by golly, I should have. So here's what really happens. This is really interesting stuff. So the amygdala really takes charge, right? Kicks the cerebral cortex out of the building. The adrenaline flows to the brain to allow for faster thinking about the situation. Not for faster thinking generally, only about the situation. Saber-tooth tiger equals run, okay? The areas of rational thought are actually suppressed. And again, the reptilian brain doesn't want you to stop and think about running. It wants you to get the heck out of Dodge, right? Anxiety increases again so that you will actually act. The muscles tense and blood flows, 300% increase in energy. This is the story of the mom pulling the car off of the babies. That's how this really happens. The pupils dilate. The two that are the most important to know, breathing becomes rapid and shallow. They actually think that, there are actually people who just study fear, this is all they do. And they actually think that that hypervigilant, that fright mode, is caused in some people by hyperventilation. Because that's how we start breathing, right? So you've got to get your breath under control, and I am going to give you a trick for that. Heart rate and blood pressure increases. The next two slides are about heart rate and how critical it is that you have to manage that. It actually impairs your short-term memory. They've done some studies of officers in deadly force encounters, and only about 30% of them actually remember the situation and what happened. So they interview them the first day, they interview them the second day, and they interview them the third day, because that tends to get up to about 70% by the third day. But it goes into your long-term memory, because if you've seen a saber-tooth tiger and you've run and you've lived to tell the tale, your reptilian brain wants you to remember that that was the successful strategy for you back then, right? Just like 9/11, this got hardwired into their brains. Interferes with the ability, so this is when people turn into complete jerks. There's an actual reason, sometimes they're just a jerk, okay, I admit it, but there's an actual reason for that, because again, it's that hormonal imbalance, essentially, and it interferes with the ability to handle social or intellectual tasks. Changes, I think this is really cool. This is the human body. In 2 or 3 different ways, your body actually changes to lessen blood loss in the event that you actually get injured. I mean, is that cool or what? This is happening, you have no control over it, it's just happening. And then I'm sure you guys have all heard stories that pain is actually temporarily lessened or completely forgotten. So the reason it's important for you to understand how all the ways that this can actually show is that what you have to do when you're training emergency teams, your evacuation and life safety teams, you have to train them and come up with tasks that are to the level of cognitive impairment they're going to have at the time, right? Your mind is out of your body. The perfect example of this, how many of you have emergency notification systems? And by the way, you should if you don't. How often have we said, active shooter in the building, you got to stop and you got to figure out how to send a message? Hello? No one does that. No one is capable of doing that. Very important for you to know. Heart rate, heart rate, heart rate. There's a guy that's actually here in Chicago, well, he's actually downstate, he's by St. Louis, that has done study after study after study of the stress performance, essentially. He does this for the military and for law enforcement. And what he found was that heart rate is directly related to the ability of your motor skills and your cognitive skills. So I am going to give you some coping mechanisms for getting your heart rate down. 115 beats per minute, we start losing those fine motor skills. Have you guys seen the movie where the woman's running from the monster and she gets her keys out of her pocket and her hands are shaking and you're going, God, you idiot, why can't you put your key in the thing? Come to find out, that's an actual thing. There's an actual reason for that. So that I thought that was kind of interesting to know. So those are the real hand-eye coordination kind of movements. At 145, you actually start losing your complex motor skills. Those are the ones that are 2 or 3 things at a time, muscle groups at trying to get them coordinated, your hearing actually starts to shut down. You get what's called tunnel hearing. And I'm going to talk about that in the next slide a little bit more. At 175, you can get tunnel vision. So you can literally lose 70% of your peripheral vision. That's why we turn into a threat and we step back. Literally, we turn into it and we step back because we're trying to widen our field of vision in the event of emergency. Critical stress amnesia, this is when you start forgetting things. They actually have done a lot of studies on police officers who said that they would be fighting somebody with a knife. The person had the knife and they would not even remember seeing the knife. All they knew is that they were in a fight for their life. Gross motor skills actually increase. You can imagine what these are: running, pushing, pulling, the big motor skills, right, to get you the heck out of the situation. After about 185, you're on your own because fright mode tends to take over. And again, we're probably in a hyperventilation state at this point, and we're just not thinking clearly. That's why the heart rate is so critical to manage. You can go from 70 to 220 in less than half of a second. That's why you can't pause. The things I'm going to show you today to do, you cannot pause. You have to start doing it right away. 115 to 145 is optimal. That may not seem right when you look at that, think about that last slide. But what it really does is it takes advantage of additional strength, right? It gives you much more fighting capability or running capability. But we're still in that range that we're not so cognitively impaired. So our thought processes are still actually working. And once you get above that, then Katie bar the door. So a couple of things to know about the mind-body connection and how critical it is that people are informed about this kind of stuff. That the higher the heart rate, the higher the perception of the threat. Okay? And what does the perception of the threat do? The higher the perception of the threat, pumps more hormones into our body. You got to get it under control. You got to get your mind back in your body, get your heart rate down so that you're not continuing to pump these hormones into your body, right? The other thing to know is as the physical symptoms appear, we literally start freaking out about freaking out. You're talking to yourself, you're going, oh my God, my heart rate's pounding like this. I can't get a breath, and my hands are shaking. And that literally pumps more hormones into your body. So just being aware that this stuff is happening, that's really all I'm talking about here, is awareness and consciousness of when you're going through a situation. And keep in mind, active shooter, probably one of the lower things that could potentially happen, and much more likely that somebody has a heart attack, somebody you love has a heart attack, or gets seriously injured, you get in a car accident, something like that. And these are all skills you use for every kind of emergency. And that's a proven fact that you have the ability to get yourself under control, and it doesn't matter what the scenario is. It works every single time. One thing to note is that I've been on the fire department for a couple of years before I actually did CPR on a child for the first time. And got so much heavy equipment on, and I'm running to this kid. He had gotten out when his parents were taking a nap and drowned in the lake. And we had already pulled him out of the lake, and I'm running there going, oh my God, what's happening to me? I mean, I got to him and my hands were shaking, and I had been doing CPR for years, right? I was completely nonplussed about this kind of stuff anymore. And I remember thinking, talking to myself, get your you-know-what rhymes with it together, Hill, because you got a kid here that you need to get resuscitated. I remember just talking to myself to try to get myself back in control. And I did some stupid things, by the way, as regard to that particular call, too. It didn't make any difference ultimately, but what this really can mean mentally, okay, and these are kind of rude words, but I am kind of that way anyway, because I want you to know that time slows down, and this is the number one thing that police officers talk about in deadly force encounters, is that this sense of time actually slowing down, that it could take, what took 30 seconds could seem like it's taken minutes and minutes and minutes, because your brain is trying to catch up with where your body is. Right? Your brain has left the building, and now you need to get caught back up again. People get stupid during emergencies, and it's really important to know and to train your emergency teams for this kind of stuff, that when we drill the same way every time, right? Please exit the building over here. Well, that's not what people are going to do. They don't generally panic, but they may not actually be acting right if you have a real, true emergency going on. And so letting your emergency teams know this and what to kind of expect is critically important. And I had to take it out because I didn't have enough time today, but there's a really good, if you go to YouTube, it's FEMA Disaster Psychology. I've got a reference page on the back of this for that. Go and actually show that to emergency teams. I think it's a series of 4, and it actually talks about what to do if somebody's panicked, what to do if somebody's in that hypervigilant stage. We just didn't have time today for me to get to it. They can take irrational or nonsensical actions. I was the first officer one time on a scene, so I was in command of the fire crew. Flame would come out the bed, literally out the roof, out the windows. Bad fire, the kind that fire departments live for. And this guy kept running back into the building. I actually had a sheriff grab him. And after the event, I walked up to him and I said, "What the heck were you doing? Every time we went back into that building, put my men at risk." And you know what he was the owner of the building. He was going back in for his golf clubs. Dead serious, for his golf clubs. And you're going, yeah. Those are expensive. He wasn't going back in for his pets. He was going back in for his golf clubs. I recognize now that that guy was not in his right mind. And by the way, his wife and kids had gotten out, just so you know. The other thing that I think is really important to know is that sociologically, and women are horrible about this, we would rather underreact than overreact and risk embarrassment. And we're going to talk about this in a minute, threat cues. Understanding all the ways a situation can actually occur, so that you're not, when the tornado sirens are going on, you don't want to be the person that goes over and actually looks out the window. But to my mind, this is a real cultural issue as well. You know that the receptionist is being harassed by her, or somebody in the office knows the receptionist is being harassed by her ex-husband, and nobody says anything about it, right? You don't want to get her in trouble, you don't want to escalate it, you don't want to have to be the one to testify about it and all of that. So this really is a cultural thing as well. That if you're sitting in an office and you're on the 50th floor of the Sears Tower, you hear a loud pop, 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 it's not a car backfiring, all right? It's probably something else. And it probably means that you pick up the phone and you call the receptionist. You don't walk out there. All right, so a couple things physically, because it does actually have to do with your emergency teams. Tunnel hearing occurs at about 1:45. It's really good in that it lessens distractions, right? Only, we're attempting to do here is only hear the footsteps of the saber-toothed tiger. It's bad, though, in that people may not hear instructions. So this is another really important thing to know in a real emergency that your life safety teams need to know, is that people may not be just jerks because they're just jerks, and they're always the people that don't evacuate. You have to go in and say, hey, out of your office, you know who those people are. But there could actually be something else going on. So it's really important that you actually do one of these. You've got to get in somebody's face and actually look at, right? They got tunnel vision going on, so you got to get in their face and actually touch them if you need to. The other thing, too, is you have to incorporate hand gestures into evacuations and shelter-in-place protocols. Because, again, somebody may simply not be hearing what you're saying. And they've done a lot of studies in plane disasters about this very thing. And basically what they found is a flight attendant just standing there being nice and going, please exit the room, is like having nobody there at all. You got to get loud, you got to be in people's faces, you got to grab them if you have to, and then move on if they won't go, by the way. So that's what's important about tunnel hearing. Tunnel vision, 70%, imagine that, 70% of your vision actually going away. You get laser focusing on certain items, just about the tiger, right? The problem is you can lose sight of the bigger event. 9 times out of 10 when somebody calls me after a disaster, they just want me to put what they're doing in perspective. Give them that broader picture of, look, we got all these resources doing this and that and this and that. Is it really going to recover the business? Most of the time it's not that way. Because they're doing all the silly things like taking care of the executives instead of actually doing anything that is going to get the business going. By the way, if anybody mentions me associated with that comment, I will deny any independent. So, here's the thing. The body reacts and the mind responds. You've got to get your mind back into the game. You can learn to control your fear. It doesn't mean you're not going to be scared, but what we're going for here is to lessen that surge of hormones and get ourselves back under control. Can you see how important that is for life safety teams? this is what we're really, at the end of the day, what I'm really saying here is we need to rethink how we're training those teams. And just literally, what you're doing today is the first step in stress inoculation. It's just sitting down and talking with people about what to expect. And it transfers to every part of their life. Because you're really much more likely to be at home and have something happen than really be at the office. And the other thing is you've got to teach people coping skills through the fear. So yes, the fear exists, but here's what you do along the way. So this is what I mentioned earlier, that this guy, Bruce Seidel, he wrote a book called Sharpening the Warrior's Edge. Must read. It's only about that big. It's not very big. You have to go online and get it. It's a fabulous book about how to train people. It's written for military and law enforcement, but he really does all of this. He talks about all of this. How do you actually kind of plunk this stuff down into training? So he calls it the survival circuit. We perceive the threat. We try to figure out what it is. We evaluate the threat level. We formulate a plan, and we initiate action. And this happens like that, right? This is a nice little breakdown of it. And what I like to call, because I thought this was very clever, the survival short circuit. Did it? This is what really happens. First, we simply don't see or perceive the threat. I'm sitting in an office, I hear a loud noise, and I'm going, what the heck is that? Come to find out, that could potentially be something really bad. We can't identify the threat, so we don't really do much about it. We misinterpret the level of the threat. Can't formulate a plan because we have no training or experience. So this is where I want to stop and ask you guys a couple of questions about how you train. Or first, I assume you're all facilities folks or office managers. Are you guys actually training the life safety teams? Do you have anything to do with that, or is it all your building? You actually train? How do you train them? Do you talk through protocols, sit down with your building? How do you guys actually do that? So I'm trying to figure out how to put this in it.
Mine is done at two levels. The building does conduct their pre-drill training class, but I sit with my floor leaders and their teams on each floor, and we walk through with a map and just break down who's doing what and step through everybody's responsible for what they need to do and why.
Okay.
And then actually we debrief after, because every time you do a drill, somebody finds a chink in the armor. So they just keep manipulating the plan, filling those gaps.
Anybody else? Are you guys actually working? How are you training?
We have a 46,000 headquarters square foot building, and we have safety wardens on each floor that are the admin assist because they're there every day. So they're the most reliable in being present when an emergency exists. So they're CPR trained, AED, that we do the drills. They actually coordinate the drills. We do 6 types of drills each year.
Oh, do you really?
We do workplace violence,
Awesome.
fire, tornado, medical emergency, power outage.
Almost no one does that. Does anybody else do that? Have you guys ever run a workplace violence scenario? Kind of a drill?
Just shelter in place.
There are two, I think, that you hit on them. Bomb and bomb threat or bomb going off, and workplace violence. Those are the two that are really going to get a different emotional reaction from people, right? Fire possibly, but most of the time buildings are sprinkler. So it's important that you actually run drills. That is the #1 indicator of success, is that people have to actually run drills, and they have to understand this stuff as they're going through. I mean, I would tie this into, I used to teach CPR, I don't anymore, but I would actually now, looking back, probably have actually tied all of this kind of stuff into how your hands shake and how disgusting doing CPR on an actual person can be if you don't have a pack and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, all of this is where you can see it's mostly in that perception of the threat that we have a problem, right? It's not so much even formulating the plan and implementing it. It's just trying to figure out when we really have a situation going on. And that's a question I get a lot. When is a disaster a disaster? Well, you have to break it down by scenario, by type, by level of impact. So there are ways to train out of this. Recognize that regular training, this is drills, is for skills acquisition. What I'm really talking about here is stress inoculation training, which is improved stress tolerance as well as keeps that functioning. One of the things I actually have to say I was really surprised about when I started doing this reading, and since you do so much training, you've hit this absolutely on the head, is that one of the things that training provides is it allows people to predict not only how they're going to react, but also what the situation is and how it's actually going to evolve over time. And that predictability actually increases their confidence. And confidence is again, one of the #1 things that people have to be able to implement whatever protocol you're giving them. And so I have to say, I was one of those mean consultants who, when an executive team would want me to come in and run a scenario, I'd run it hard and fast. And they were like, shaking and crying by the end of it, but I was getting a kick out of it. So, not just serious. Anyway, increased confidence. You got to start small, have really great steps. Everybody goes, yay, aren't we wonderful? And then you start bringing in other things into your scenario and make it harder and harder and harder. But that confidence is extremely important. It decreases distraction, and that makes for a more effective response. So this is really this is this Bruce Seidel work. It's called Survival Stress Management. Experience through training. You all know it. You probably would rather do more drills. You're probably not ever going to get that approved. Skills confidence, obviously, is critically important. Much, much more so than I ever thought. But I want to spend most of the time talking about that perception of the threat, because I think that's the part where it really breaks down. So a couple of things that we want to make sure that we're doing is recognizing the symptoms leading to the fear circuit. So when your hands start shaking, here are a couple of things you can do to get yourself back under control. I'm going to talk about those. Also discussing all the ways that something can happen, right? All the ways, not just drilling the same exact way every single time, because it has to do with the adaptive behaviors down on the bottom that they found that the military can always come up with a plan A and a plan B. It's why you always want military folks around you in the event of an actual disaster, because they're used to thinking on their feet, right? But that's not how we train people. When we're drilling exactly the same way every single time, we're not teaching adaptive behaviors. And that right there is where things really fall apart with common folks like us who aren't out there doing this on a regular basis, right? So plan A, plan B, extremely important. Applying stress management techniques to reduce that heart rate as well. And those threat cues, I can't tell you how critical. I just did this talk, it's almost the same exact talk, at a school district last week. And they said, you know what, every time we drill on active shooter and do a lockdown, where all the kids, all the teachers, everybody's in their room, we never even thought about the fact that in the morning is when the front doors are open and anybody can walk in, and that's probably, quite frankly, a more likely time that we would actually have somebody walk in and cause problems. So that was one of the things that they learned, and why they're going to start running all different kinds of drills. So here's the first thing. You all need to be able to do this. It's called tactical breathing. There are actually, I've seen lots of different numbers. I usually use 7. It forces me to slow my breathing down a little bit. But you just basically breathe in for 3, hold for 3, out for 3, hold out for 3. And you do that cycle at least 3 times. You guys can go home and practice this. You want to count because it creates a distraction. Anything that creates a distraction, when you see that psychology of disaster thing, you'll see that's all they're really doing is just trying to get the person kind of back into their body. So you want to count. Breathing actually creates a bridge between both sides of your brain. It's a proven fact. It's one of the only things that will actually increase your cognitive abilities following a disaster. So you do this immediately. Don't wait for your hands to start shaking. Okay? It took me, when I was running towards that kid, it took me forever to kind of realize what was really even happening with me. And you know, I should have known by then. So you want to start it right away. It can literally decrease your heart rate by up to 20%. And think about all of the skill level that you lose as your heart rate starts increasing. That's a big deal. Really important to teach this to your life safety teams. The other thing you can do, come to find out, Oprah was right, positive self-talk, which I have been doing for ages and ages. And what you really want to do is actually just have a good discussion with yourself in the event of an emergency, because when we are in that threat mode, it's, right, we're analyzing the level of the threat. If we really think our life is in jeopardy, our body is responding in a different way versus this really sucks, but I don't think I'm going to die because of this, right? I've smelled smoke, I see smoke in the building. I'm probably not likely to die because of this. So just asking a simple question like, but is it really that bad? Anytime you ask that, you get yourself working again. You get your brain working again. You're creating a distraction for yourself. A working brain can develop and implement a plan. And the longer you're in that threaten mode, the much more likely to go into fright mode, right? Because it's a self-feeding thing. The other thing, I'm not suggesting that you try to go back and teach people this, although I think you should, but it's would be kind of woo-woo, I think, for people. The other thing that you guys can do, and I think one of the things that's hard to plan for active shooter is that you could be anywhere. You have a huge facility, right? You could be anywhere in the building. Visualization actually works really great for trying to figure out what you would actually do at any given point in time. I don't have enough time to walk you through a visualization, or I would do that today, because this is a super powerful tool. I've been years and years since I've been a medical practitioner, and the fact is I visualized my assessments so many to thousands of times to be able to pass my license test that I can still do it just as effectively today. And I did it through visualization, not by actually having people fall down in front of me and doing the assessment. Be very specific in the physiological response issue. So when you're visualizing, like first, when you go back to your office, think about where you're sitting in the office, kind of visualize how you would lock your door. What would you do if an active shooter came in? How would you draw in your blinds? You literally have to be that specific, but also think through how you might be feeling and how your hands might be shaking and that you're really afraid, right? One of the things they tell you to do is silence your cell phone. Hello, your hands are shaking, you have no fine motor skills, and you're doing one of these, click, 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 click. I always forget that I have a button on the side of my iPhone. But you can't actually do that. Again, you got to practice this stuff, right? This is exactly the kind of stuff you have to practice. Talk about the potential threat cues, all the ways that something can actually evolve. Pre-program the proper survival response. For instance, when I'm doing a visualization, I usually use fire in the middle of the night at your house because everybody can visualize their own house. And how I do that is I say, okay, drop, 2 o'clock in the morning, you wake up, you can't see your hand in front of your face. Drop to the floor next to your bed, crawl to the wall. If you've got loved ones in the house, which way are you going to turn? Are you going to turn left or are you going to turn right? How many turns, how many door jams between you and the kids, between you and your elderly parents or your pets? How would you actually do that? But I teach them the right way to do it, right? Because you don't want to crawl into the middle of a room and then you're going, oh my God, which way am I going? I have no idea where the door is. So you always want to go to the wall and go right or left from your pet. So that's basically what I'm saying here, is make sure that you're thinking about it the right way. One of the interesting things about workplace violence, and actually kind of any emergency, remember when you're flight attendants always say your closest exit may be in behind you? So this is one of the things that visualization allows you to do, that the 90% of the time, wherever you're at in your office, is it better to go forward, is it better to go back, and the run, hide, fight thing. And then pre-program a plan B. I have a shooter in the hallway. I cannot run because he's going to see me in the corridor. I'm now going to close my door. I don't have a lock, so I'm going to pull my desk in front of the thing, or I'm going to take the chair and I'm actually going to put it up underneath the the handle to actually lock the door. So always give yourself a plan A and a plan B. And this is something you need to be training your emergency teams on as well, because you may not be able to get down some stairwell at some point. They talked about that over and over again after 9/11. It was completely not at all what they had drilled on, right? Sometimes the actual exits weren't available, or they get down and I have to cross over and go down the other side of the building. Nobody knew that, so they got there and just kind of did one of these. And they didn't know what to do. So this is all of the stuff you can do through visualization. Huge fan of this. My daughter just graduated from the Police Training Institute, and they actually do visualizations in the morning and then scenarios in the afternoon from the very first day. That's how powerful a tool this is. And they actually told her while she was driving around and she's not on a call to actually visualize. She goes into a convenience store to get a Coke and somebody comes in and tries to rob the place. What would you actually do? So this is stress inoculation. You have to practice, practice, practice. I'm not suggesting suggesting that you do a full-on more evacuations of the entire floor. I'm really just talking about the life safety teams and actually walking through, like you spend 2 hours talking about workplace violence. First half an hour is talking about what we just talked about today. This is literally the first part of stress inoculation training, what we've been talking about. And then you walk through, okay, you're all in your offices because it's 9, 10, and you're all still checking email. You hear a pop, pop, pop out in the reception area. What would you do? Would you run? Would you stay? And then just literally go around the room and have them talk about it, right? Especially if they're all on different floors. Let them talk about that. Use visualization. I think you should teach your life safety teams to do that. Your brain doesn't know whether or not you're in an actual situation or whether you're just imagining it. Remember, the perception of the threat still can create the response. So that's a really important principle there. Train on using breath control to slow the heart rate. So this is how you run a scenario. Identify the predictable level of stress during application of the skill. So literally, what I just got done saying, workplace violence scenario, this is what you're going to feel. You know, you may have to go to the bathroom, you may have to, your hands may be shaking, you may start sweating profusely, your mouth gets really dry, all of those kinds of things so that they know what to expect. Predictability is one of the keys of success. Discuss the techniques to segment it into the beginning, middle, and end. So you start with a scenario where you're hiding, and then you go next to a scenario where you're running, and then you do a scenario where you're fighting. You don't want to try to do too much. Break it down, beginning, middle, and end. Make sure they're successful before you take them into the next step. Develop dynamic training exercise. I'm so excited. Next week I'm going to go through, have you guys, any of you heard, it's a very controversial ALICE training that they're doing in schools nowadays where they're teaching the kids to fight back. I'm actually going to do that training next week, and one of the things they do is they spend the first day talking, and they spend the second day doing scenario after scenario after scenario. So I'm really excited to actually go through it. But again, you just introduce the fundamentals, just what you were doing, Audrey, saying walking through your protocols, or just what you were doing, walking through your protocols first. Do a slow walk through, literally a walk, and I mean literally take a chair and put it up underneath the the handle on your office door. So that they come in the right way. Literally walk through the things, because this creates muscle memory. That's really what you're trying to do. That's what visualization does. So that those, like your receptionist, get up underneath the desk and push the panic button. You need a panic, by the way. Panic button, by the way, if you don't have one. Get up underneath it and press. If they haven't practiced that and they're completely out of their mind, how successful do you think they're going to be? You got to practice that kind of stuff. Even in your visualizations. How does the door handle feel in your hand? Is it cold? What about when you jam something up? Make sure that you're taking the handle and pulling in so that the door doesn't, or whatever it is you stuck up underneath there doesn't just fall over. You really have to get to that level of detail. And then practice, of course, through scenarios. Train on developing a survival checklist. Essentially, you're really just putting them in the seat of increased confidence and increased predictability, and that's going to make sure that they're successful. That's really what that means. So, here are the books that are must read. I want you to know, I totally took one for the team because this was so boring. Most of it was. It was interesting, but it was boring. So, the Warrior's Edge is kind of out there a little bit, but it's interesting. Sharpening the Warrior's Edge is Psychology and Science of Training. A must read. That's Bruce Seidel. I just realized I didn't give you the first names. That was stupid. Bruce Seidel. He's got, his website is hfrg.org. He's actually going to come on doing a talk show, which I completely forgot to mention earlier. I'll talk about it here in a minute. And he's actually going to come on my show. Performance Under Stress was really good. The FEMA Community Emergency Response Team training is very good. And the Unthinkable and Amanda Ripley book is just really interesting. It talks about, she kind of interviewed a lot of disaster survivors and kind of went over their coping mechanisms and their skills. The rest of them, run away, because they're boring. So I'm so excited. It's the first of its kind in the nation. I'm actually going to be doing a nationwide talk show on emergency preparedness and risk management. I would love to hear any ideas that you guys have, because you have a unique perspective on any kind of topic that you think might be interesting. I'm actually starting the show with active shooter scenario, and I've got the director of the Police Training Institute is going to come in and actually do it's on an hour. It's a weekly show on for an hour, and so I hope that people get tuned in, because I'll tell you, and I'm sure you guys felt the same way. I'm done. I mean, I've had enough after Sandy Hook. It's like, stop talking about, you need to talk about gun control, but I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to give people skills. You got to have skills. And the only way you have skills is if you actually sit down and talk about this stuff. Stop being afraid. Fear is rooted in the fact that people don't know what to do. So the other thing you can do, I thought I had put it on here, and I apologize. I told you I'd actually put it on here. Have you guys seen the Run, Hide, Fight video? Go to YouTube. Type in the search, Run, Hide, Fight. It's from Ready Houston. Fabulous. Fabulous. And then sit down. I'm actually doing a bunch of lunch and learns with people. We're going to show that, because it actually is kind of scary. They actually started by somebody coming in and shooting people. And it's shocking. And play that at a lunch and learn, and then actually talk about the actual protocols. Very interesting stuff. And it's a really well done, I think. Don't you guys think? I thought it was a very well done video. So what questions do you have? I talked really fast, so I'd have a little bit of time for questions. Or ideas for taking this kind of training back and working on it.
I'm new to my role as safety officer, so I've developed policies. Yeah. I've developed policies, but need to take that next step and start walking my emergency team through their responsibilities.
Yeah.
You know, I picked up a lot of good stuff of starting small and stuff, but you know, what would you recommend are the first steps there? You know, should I walk somebody through the spot they're supposed to search in an evacuation, or?
What is your has your building weighed in on how they do their training?
It's a standalone, so.
So it's you. You are the building. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's what I would do. People have to be able to touch, feel, smell. I mean, they literally have to have almost a physiological response to the area. That sounds ridiculous, but they actually have to kind of know where they go, and so they can visualize it. Like, I can't really run through people through visualizations if I haven't seen the space, right? Because I don't know, how to run them through. So that's actually exactly the right way, I think.
How would I handle the workplace? We just had a disruptive behavior code 10, and its patient was very belligerent, let's say, at the front desk. How would I walk through those ladies at the front desk and step them through some typical response?
I would get security involved in the company so that first they understand what they're doing. You don't have a security staff, like guards or something.
That's me.
Did they at least give you a gun?
I was talking about mace.
Yeah, literally, like I talked about, all the ways, right? So you have a threatening situation there, so all the ways that this could actually evolve. So that's one way. Another way is somebody walks in brandishing a weapon. Another way is that you actually hear a loud noise, or people start screaming and you're wondering what that is. You have to break it down like that, because those are the threat cues. Nobody ever gets trained on, right? It's always, oh, guy just got off the elevator, like that Run, Hide, Fight thing. Was that guy a major red flag or what? He's like got a black flak jacket on, he's brandishing a weapon. I mean, that's a red flag. So literally just break it down like that and walk them through the protocols. What I would suggest to the Department of Homeland Security just published after, like 2 weeks after Sandy Hook, updated protocols. The other thing too that I think is really important on the fight, especially with women in the medical industry, because they're already helping, they're really nice people to begin with, is actually stand at their desk and talk about how you would improvise weapons if you had to. Literally, how, could that be a weapon? Could this plate, that's probably not very effective, but a bottle of water probably is highly effective. Yeah, I mean, you literally have to walk people through that level of detail, because what you're going for is creating that muscle memory. I know everybody else is going, how are you ever going to get that much time? Honestly, I'm not having any problem right now getting time with people on this topic. Everybody is worried about this topic. You go, you try to talk for an hour, and you end up there 3 hours, because this is just that big of a deal. So let me know if you have any questions. I talked to Jerry about whether or not we have time to do the actual workplace violence protocols, which we really just didn't because I really wanted to make sure we got through this. Watch the Run, Hide, Fight thing. Download the stuff from the Department of Homeland Security. Their active shooter protocols are super good. They've really shrunk them down. They're very, very good now. Other questions? Or give me a call if you've got a question.
You know, we've only scratched the surface of information that Pam has that she can share